Do you ever feel like you're just waiting for your happy ending? Sometimes when we are in the middle of the hard, where everything feels like we're being depleted, we wonder, where is this happy ending? And maybe we just have to wait. Maybe we just have to wait for the goodness. Maybe we just have to wait for the joy. But this conversation today is going to teach us that we don't have to wait for the promises of God, but we can have the promises today. Hi, and welcome to Magnify. We are a podcast that helps keep General Conference top of mind without adding to your to-do list. I'm your host, Kathryn Davis, a mom, a seminary teacher, and a big football fan who loves God. And I am so excited to learn and be inspired with you. We know life is busy, and we are here to lighten the load by bringing you weekly spiritual reminders that will leave you feeling a little bit better than before. Joining in this discussion today is Maria Eckersley, who is known for capitalizing on the happy moments in life. She is the ultimate mom hacker, mega party planner, and a devoted fun mom. This is going to be a great conversation today to help us find the happiness in the gospel. Well, Maria, I'm so glad that you're here today.
Same. It's really good to be here.
And I'm excited to talk about the inspiration you received from Elder Sabin's talk, Hallmarks of Happiness.
Yeah, that was a fantastic talk.
Well, I want to know, what were some of the things that you loved? What was inspiration for you?
Honestly, his whole demeanor was uplifting to me. I just felt like he's a storyteller. So he kind of bounces from one story to the next at a pace that I could keep up with. And I was delighted by. And I just felt like his face was it wasn't joyful in a toxically positive way. It was just calmly happy. He just seemed genuinely happy. And so I found myself wanting to go back to his words just because I was like, I want that. I want to be able to talk about the hard and good times of my life with that steady, happy. And so I loved that. What did you love about him?
Well, I love some of his stories. I always learn from stories. And he started out with the story about his sons and archery. And why don't you
love that?
Yeah. What did you love about that story?
Well, to set it up, he talks about how he has this son who has some health struggles. He's got cystic fibrosis and how he goes to this Boy Scout camp and he's trying to get a merit badge for archery. And I just loved his whole, from a dad perspective, he's like, I had to send him out to this challenge in order to try and accomplish it. But as a dad, he was worried he wouldn't get it because his muscles just couldn't keep up. And he talks about having his son bound back in, reporting that he got a bullseye, not on his target, but on the other target. And I just found myself, from a parenting perspective, you can imagine the joy that just must have filled his heart at that moment. And I just love the way he spoke about the archery instructor. To me, the way he talked about him as being, he was so grateful to that instructor that he didn't say, oh, sorry, you got the wrong target. To me, it felt like he was trying to teach us about God, that God is somebody who just looks at you and says, great job, because he has all these targets out there for us. I just thought it was comforting.
So what do you mean by he has all these targets out for us? And how does that apply for you and I in the everyday?
Oh, 100 ways, because I'm constantly taking shots, right? I'm trying to do good in the world. I'm trying to do good in my family. And my focus is almost always on the target, right? And I take a shot and there's this empty target down the road. And I just feel hollow. Can I give you an example where this hit pretty hard home for me? So one of my kids in their late teen years, they were really struggling with some questions they had about the church. And she came to me. We had a good discussion about it. And I said, if you could just write down your concerns, just let me know where your big trouble points are. And then I'll come back to you I'll study it and I'll work and then we'll sort this out. I was coming with this, I'm going to get this. And so in my head, I had this idea of I'm going to study, I'm going to figure this out. The Lord will help me and I'll answer all her questions. Well, by the time we got to come back together to talk about it, she didn't want to talk anymore. In fact, she kind of was like, no, I've sort of made my decision. And in my mind, it was this great big bullseye that was empty. I could see this target that I was like, I took the shot. I tried really hard to aim. And it was just the target was empty for me. And what I found in the next couple weeks, even over the last 2 or 3 years since that time, is that he's given me all these other targets where that arrow actually hit. Like I teach a YSA class, and it's been so cool to see those things I studied about Joseph Smith, those things I studied about the translation process have been a blessing to me to be able to answer questions to people in other places. They weren't my target that I was shooting for, but wow, I've seen bullseyes hit in other places. So that's how I feel. I feel like it's just this, just do good, try to do good, send something out, and then let him move targets accordingly, or just miss and he'll love you anyway. That's how I felt. How about you?
Well, I just wonder too, maybe you didn't even miss the target.
Yeah, maybe. I think that's really possible. The visual that came into my mind, I don't know if you remember this as a kid, Kathryn. Did you ever watch the old Robin Hood, like the old Robin Hood, the cartoon?
Yes.
And there's this archery contest, and there's a guy inside like the hay bale that they're shooting for. And as soon as the bad guy shoots his arrow, like the target moves in order for him to get a bullseye. That's kind of how I started to picture the Lord's efforts with me. Like, he's like, Maria, just shoot, and I will find a place for your target to land. I will make sure that there is a spot for your whatever goodness you're sending out to hit. And so you just have to stop. At least for me, I found I just had to stop stressing about the impact and the result and just trust in the goodness of God. He'll find a spot for my arrow to land.
You know what? I rely on that so much, especially as a teacher. But I think there are a couple things we have to remember, that you did preparation. It's not like you were like, whatever, I'm just going to throw this out there. Right? Like, you did some preparation and you did your best. And there are days where I think that was the worst lesson I have ever taught. Like that didn't resonate. Nobody paid attention. And I might be really hard on myself. And then, I don't know, something will happen like a month or two later that a student will come back and say something that they learned from that lesson. And I think, what? Like, you were totally asleep. You were on your phone the whole time. There's no way you learned anything from that. And it just reinforces to me that God will move the targets. And if I do my best, that trust that he'll make up the rest. He'll make up that distance, or he'll move it to where it needs to be. And it takes a lot of pressure off if I can trust in that.
Yeah. Well, and I just think these are not normal arrows, right? They can hover in midair for days and months and years. I mean, like, your student is an example of that, where that arrow seems to just hover and you're like, where did it go? What happened? And then out of nowhere, months later, it strikes the target and you're like, oh my word, this is not my work. Clearly there's something bigger at play. I just think it's powerful. To me, the scripture that kept coming to mind is that one in Doctrine and Covenants. It's 46:9, where he says, he's urging them to keep the commandments. And then he says, basically, and those who seek it so to do. Like, if you're seeking to do good and you're seeking to keep the commandments, that gets you the spiritual merit badge. It's not about the hitting the target. So I love that piece.
So how do you trust in God, Maria, in those times where you think, oh, it's not hitting that target?
I think that's why you have to take things on balance. In my brain, I feel like that's why we have so many chances to build faith. Because if I can't find it in my own life, I can turn to the scriptures and I can read how it works for Nephi. I can read how it worked for Esther or for anybody and say, like, okay, I know God's character, not just from my own personal experiences, but from what the prophets have taught, and what I listen to President Nelson at conference, or if I listen to Elder Sabin at conference, I can listen to their messages and say, even if he's not showing up for me the way I expected him to, I know that he does show up. And so for me, you kind of need that cushion. You need scripture, and you need living prophets and apostles to say, trust me, this works. Give it a minute. That arrow will hit.
And I think all those things help us have a relationship that God will move those targets, and it helps us trust him. And you call it trusting in divine arithmetic.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, I just think we tend to measure things with our mortal brains. And I think one of the things I really loved about Elder Sabin's talk is when he talked about, well, to be perfectly honest, I sort of loved and hated this part of his talk, because he talked about how we should, a hallmark of happiness. One of the ways we can find happiness is by doing good. The way he phrased it, though, I thought was really interesting. He talked about the worth of a soul. So he said, one of the ways you can find happiness is if you remember the worth of a soul. And then he talked about charity and doing what we can and blessing those maybe even who don't deserve it. You know, he just kind of talked about that stance. And my struggle with that is I've had some rocky moments in my past where I have felt like I give and give and I don't get much back. There's this picture I saw once. I can't remember if it was on Instagram. There was a Capri Sun pouch, like a juice pouch that had like a dozen straws jabbed into it, and it was sucked completely dry. Like it was just this shriveled up thing. I saw that, Kathryn, and I was like, that's me. Like, I think that's me. I've got people pulling on me from every direction, and there's just not enough of me to go around. And so then when you go to church or you read a talk from somebody like Elder Sabin and you hear them say, like, please give and please do what you can and show charity, my heart just feels shriveled at that moment. So I love that his focus was on remember the worth of souls. What he didn't say, just be good, be charitable, do service. He said, no, remember the worth of souls. Because when you look at somebody with that lens, it's not so much about the give and the take. To me, that's why it's divine arithmetic. It's like, I can trust that God can make up for what I lack. I think a lot of times we think about making up for what I lack, meaning like he can bless that other person. My giving is not going to be good enough, so he'll bless them in the way that they need. But I really think the divine arithmetic comes in when he blesses me in the process. He finds a way to fill me up as I give, almost like a siphon, like as I put something out into the world, he fills me up at that same time. And so I think there's a message there in his talk that's about like, trust that divine arithmetic, that as you give and do good, he will find ways to fill you from some divine source. There was this great talk I listened to. Actually, I just heard it yesterday. This is Sister Porter. She was talking at a BYU devotional, and she said, we need to focus on receiving. Oftentimes we get so fixated on giving and serving and putting out. When we feel depleted, I think that means we're not receiving enough. And then her whole talk was about God's gospel is all about giving you gifts. Like he wants to bless you. He wants to help you. And you are willing and worthy to receive those gifts. So let him do that. And to me, it was just eye-opening. It was like, oh, if I get those Capri Sun moments where I just feel tapped, that means I've stopped connecting to the sources that will replenish me. I've let my scripture studies slide, or I've let my prayers dwindle, or I've been so busy doing things that I stopped going to the temple, or these places that I'm supposed to draw strength from. Have you seen that?
Yeah. Well, and I think he is a God of abundance, right? He is a God who's wanting to pour out a heaping load of blessing upon us. And sometimes I forget that it's the heaping load or it's the God of abundance. As we're studying about like Nephi building the boat, and sometimes I feel like I have so many holes in my boat and there's so many things I'm trying to plug and I'm just sinking. And if you look in Genesis where it says, they said cover the boat with pitch and pitch it on the inside and the outside. And the Hebrew word for pitch is kafar, which means atonement. And it's the first time atonement shows up in the Bible. And so I just think all those holes, all those sinking things the atonement of Jesus Christ can make me seaworthy if I allow it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. And if you turn to the right sources, I think sometimes it's so hard because I'll sometimes hear that in church and I'll be like, but how? How do I use the atonement to cover these holes? Like, how do I do that? And I think that's really hard because the answer is a really simple one. Go to the right source to receive. I need you to pray. I need you to study the scriptures. I need you to show up at the temple. I need you to serve. And those are the places you're going to find covering. And it's hard because I want something bigger. But then I always remember like Naaman, and how he wanted something bigger. He had that leprosy problem and he wanted a big, beautiful solution. And the one he got was this humble, nope, just dip yourself in this dirty river 7 times. And he didn't want it. So I think we have to keep humble and trust that will work.
Well, when have you experienced this, Maria? Can you think of a time or a story in your life where you have seen or experienced a God of abundance?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you that it was in one key moment, but I felt it over the course of a few years really intensely when Jason was really sick and we were struggling. In fact, at one point, Kathryn, okay, let me just give you some backstory. So Jason was diagnosed with cancer. We were back in the hospital with pancreatitis after, like, in the middle, which is horrible in a lot of ways. My daughter was about to go on her mission. She's my first daughter heading out. Like, I had all this emotional baggage. I was just overwhelmed. And in the middle of that trial or series of trials, I get a mission call to be a service missionary. And it was to be a service missionary for a family search. And it was a 2 to 3 year commitment. And it wasn't going to replace my ward calling. It was in addition to. And I just was like,
wait. You're like, you know all the information.
And they did, Kathryn. That's what was hard, is I was like, Heavenly Father, are you kidding me? So I went to my mom and like Jason, my sister. I talked to several people and they were like, Maria, you're going to run faster than you have strength. You just need to, like, pray about this, but, like, I don't run faster than you have strength. And so I went to the temple, Kathryn, expecting that I would receive you're doing so great. It's okay. You know, I just thought that was going to happen. The answer I got it was one of the most clear answers I've ever had. And it was, Maria, run and I will give you strength. And I was like, okay, here we go. You know, like, I just didn't know how that was going to work. I didn't know how any of my life was going to shake out. And that answer it would, like, reverberate in my mind. And I felt like every time life got hard and every time I felt like I was overwhelmed, I had to remind myself, he promised you strength. You need to go find the sources that you can draw it, you know, because he can't just, like, dump it into me. I have to seek out the places that I can pull strength from. So I had to seek out opportunities to do my calling better. I had to seek out opportunities to really get into my scriptures and wrestle with things. Because in those places, I drew strength, because he'd promised me it would be there when I needed it. So I just had to trust in that. I can tell you, Kathryn, that it is a calling I have never learned more. I've never learned more in any other calling than I did in that one, both about my own weaknesses and about the goodness of God. Because it was an absolute gift. It was a really hard, poorly timed, beautiful gift. And that's what I think he's trying to help us understand. Trust in the goodness of God.
That is divine arithmetic, when it shouldn't fill you, when it looks like it's going to deplete you, but somehow God.
And it did in some ways. Yeah. You know, like, I don't want to pretend like everything was glossy and great. It wasn't. What he filled me with is, like, he blessed me with these mission companions that all throughout so much of Jason's cancer journey were right there with me, you know, and they were praying with me, fasting with me. And I wouldn't have had those things the same way without it. So it did deplete me and take my energy and my attention, which was hard. But what I got back was so worth it. So it's hard, but it was so good.
So what has learning about that divine arithmetic taught you about trusting in God's precious promises?
Well, this kind of comes on the heels of that last period of struggle where things were so hard. But I really liked when he talked about his 16-year-old daughter. Do you remember this part of the conference talk? And he talked about his daughter who had cystic fibrosis and she was getting a double lung transplant. And that phrase she said, because he talks about how much faith she had, because the night before this really scary surgery, she basically said, it's okay, Dad. You know, either I'm going to wake up and I'll have great lungs. This isn't a quote, but you know what I mean? Like, either I'll be able to breathe on my own, or I'll be in a better place. And he spoke about her faith, and it was so beautiful. And honestly, Kathryn, my heart just, like, shrunk a little bit when I heard him speak it, because I'd been in that spot. Not in the exact scenario that he was in, but my heart was really most impressed with Elder Sabin's faith. I just thought, as a parent, to stand in that spot and hear your daughter say something like that and stay in that moment. And I just thought it must have been so hard, because I had that with Jason. When he was first diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, he had to do this really scary surgery. I don't know how it compares to cystic fibrosis and a double lung transplant, but it was one where, like, we had to submit a will to the hospital. We had to, like, you had to sign paperwork about, anyway, it was kind of terrifying. And he said something sort of like that to me. It was like 5 a.m. I was just getting him prepped and they were about to take him back. We had recorded a little video for the kids just in case. And he said something like that, like, it's going to be okay, Maria. And I believed that if he didn't make it or if things didn't go well, he would be in a better place. I wasn't sure I believed that I could be, you know, like, I just thought, how do I wrestle with this? And it took time. I wish I could tell you that this answer came that day, but I have learned over time that if you believe in God's promises, you have to believe in all of his promises, you know? So if you believe that when someone passes away, that they really are going to a better place and that you really will see them again someday, that means you also should believe that God keeps his promises here, that he will help you in your time of need, that he will come to you when you struggle, that he will answer your prayers when you're afraid. Like, you don't get to pick and choose God's promises. He keeps all of them. And when I read Elder Sabin's words, it really comforted me. You know, I read a little more backstory on him. I don't know how much you know about his story, but his son, the archery son, also struggled with cystic fibrosis. There's an Ensign article that he contributed to that where he talked about his story, and he passed away the year before this daughter had her surgery. And I thought, wow, how does he stand there in that moment with such faith and being through all that trauma and hard and be okay? And I think that's how he does it, because he trusts in all the promises of God, you know, not just the faraway ones. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So Maria, what do you mean by short-term promises? What does that look like for you?
Mine was like very tangible. Like my biggest fear when Jason went in is I'm like, how am I going to provide for our family? Not only am I not physically enough, but like how I haven't been the provider before. This was always kind of our deal, that was going to be his big job and I would chip in here and there. But so I had to believe that he would give me those short-term promises too, that if I paid my tithing, the needs of my family would be met. If I did my best to diligently work hard and use my time well, he would find ways to make sure my kids had the help they needed. And, you know, like those short-term promises, I needed to trust that he would help me in those everyday moments just as much as he would keep his promises about the fact that Jason and I would be married forever and that we would have a family forever. And it's hard, but if you believe in one, you have to believe in the other.
So in the middle of that wrestle on the hard days, Maria, where it seems to, I think, feel like your ship is sinking, what do you hold on to? Like, how do you hold on to those promises? Because it's one thing to hear them. I think it's another thing to hold on to them. And you're talking about holding on to them.
Yeah, I just think you have to, it's the same answer I think you have to trust in the promises that are in the scriptures. You have to read those stories and believe that they can happen. You have to read conference talks like these and believe that those witnesses are true. And then I think you also have to have like a well of your own. You know, I have a well of tender mercy moments that I can pull from, that I can't explain in any earthly way. I can't explain in anything that even makes sense to other people sometimes. But I have this well that I can draw from, so that when I'm afraid, I go back to those memories and they kind of buoy me up just enough to make it the next day, you know, just enough to make it to the next big hurdle. And then usually once we've made it past that big hurdle, I've got another one to add to the bank, you know, like I've got another miracle I can add. So for me, I need all three of those. I need words of the prophet in scripture, words of the prophet that lives today. And I need my own well of revelatory experiences, little sweet things that witness to me that God cares specifically about me. And they're abundant. I think especially if you make an effort to notice them, write them down, share them, they're abundant.
Is that what you did? Did you make an effort to notice them or write them? What did you do?
Yeah, I say them a lot to my kids. That's really I didn't have time to journal very well. That was a hard time. But I made a point of like saying them out loud to my kids over and over again. We talk about miracles a lot in our house because I want them to see them. I want them to recognize that they happen. And honestly, there's something, you know, we talk about testimony, that when you bear your testimony, it actually gets like solidified in the process of bearing it.
Yeah.
I feel like that with miracles. I feel like miracles become real to me when I speak them, when I share them with somebody else. It doesn't have to be on a big platform. It doesn't have to be to my whole family in a devotional. It could be me driving my kid to high school and saying, yeah, but don't forget about what happened with Dad. Remember that day that I was so afraid? You know, like those little moments, those little miracles, they add up. And I think just speaking them solidifies them in my brain and helps the Spirit bring them back to my remembrance later.
Well, Elder Sabin goes on to say that noticing those miracles and looking at those, that is the hallmark of happiness, that actually is the constitution of a happy life.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't you just love his outlook? I just think he's trying to condense down. The world makes it seem so complicated that there's this big, hard, that we have to find the 7 steps for the happiest life or whatever. And he's just saying, no, you can actually condense this way down to just keep the commandments of God, keep your covenants, and happiness comes. What I love is happiness is not like the reward we get for a good life. Happiness is the consequence of living a good life. It's what you get every day you pick it. So I think it's just this, you're just supposed to kind of stay in this river and let it carry you. Does that make sense?
Yes. And sometimes let the water of the river splash on you.
Yeah, it's true. I love that, in Enos's story, I love when he says, he's talking about his struggles. He was worried about his own insecurities and his own lack of understanding. And he talks about how he remembered the words of his dad and then his guilt is swept away. I actually think you can take guilt out of that sentence and put in almost anything else. Like you can put pain in that sentence. You can put fear and anxiety about the future. When you turn to God and you remember the kind of God he is, your pain can get swept away. Your guilt, your anxieties about being able to do whatever he wants you to do next, all that can be swept away when you think about the goodness of God, how big and how capable he really is. I've seen it. I know it works.
Probably the only way you've been able to make it through some of the last few years.
Yeah. These years have been filled with joy too. I don't think they're all heavy.
Well, that's what I want to know. Like if Elder Sabin talks about some of the hallmarks of a happy life, what would you say is a hallmark of a happy life? Because you truly are, I think, a joyful person. And I think we can find happiness and joy here and now. It's not all in the future. And I think that's the promises, right? That he promises us joy, but that's not just in the future. There can also be some for the here and now.
Yeah. Well, and there is always, right? In fact, I think you don't even appreciate the joy unless you've seen a lot of that hard, right? It's those dark nights that we notice the stars are so bright because there's no moon out and it is so dark outside. I just think that's kind of the same principle with us is the hard and the light, they go together. I can appreciate those joyful moments and I just lean into them. When life is good and the kids are doing great, like I lean into that joy because I know it can't last forever. We've seen enough undulating health history that I'm like, it won't feel like this forever. So I got to like soak it in as much as I can and build up my reservoir before things get hard again. No, I don't know. For me, I think if you can look to the future with hope, no matter what is happening, I think that's a hallmark of happiness for me. The people that I'm drawn to most are the ones who are hopeful. Hopeful about our society, hopeful about how their kids are going to do, hopeful about where the church is going to go next. I just think there's something divine about being able to be in hard circumstances and look forward with hope-filled eyes.
Well, Maria, I have loved this conversation. And so we like to end every episode with a small and simple challenge. What would be yours from our conversation today?
One of the things that jumped out at me in his talk, I love the way he said he prays about being able to breathe, from his daughter's experience where she was so grateful to breathe that she cried. And so ever since that day, he said, morning and night, I pray for the ability to breathe or thank God for the ability to breathe. And I thought, I don't do that in my prayers. I don't thank God for my functioning pancreas, even though I know what life looks like when it doesn't function. So I'm like, I need to pray for small and simple things. So I thought, what if our challenge is just that? Like, what if you take 30 seconds of your prayer to pray for 3 small, simple things? And maybe you break it up by day. Maybe you just do it one day. But wouldn't it be great if we added into our prayers just 3 tiny things that we're grateful for and then see how we feel about our day?
I think there's power in noticing the small and simple things, right? And actually, when I hear other people's small and simple things, it starts to grow for me. And so I think it would be so powerful to hear from other people.
Yeah, wouldn't you want to know what they're grateful for? What little thing are they praying for in gratitude that they've never thought of before? Yeah, I totally agree. I think it'd be fun if we saw that on social media, if we engaged with each other that way. If we go on Instagram and share what it is we're grateful for and how it's changing our week. I would love to see that.